When The Home Place was first published, the publishers claimed that it was a new fiction form in the particular way it combined writing and photography. It's a relatively simple story. It's one day in the life of the narrator, Clyde Munsey, who has returned home to his great-uncle's farm in Nebraska and is considering whether to leave New York City, where he lives with his wife and 2 children, and resettle in Nebraska in the hope of living a more comfortable, simpler life. And he does it in both words and pictures. So the book opens on a character who you're going to realize is the old man. And he is the only person, other than a family photograph, we'll talk about later, to be depicted in the text. The emphasis in the photographs, otherwise, is wholly on places and things. And we notice in this photograph of the old man that we don't see his face. And there are 2 other pictures of him. In fact, the book ends on another photograph of him, and in none of these pictures do we see his face. It's as if the words will supply the character. Wright Morris was born in 1910 in Central City, Nebraska. Central City, although it sounds big, was just a small town, which he later in his fictions usually called Lone Tree. He spent his first years there and then moved to Omaha, Nebraska, which at the time was a city but still a relatively small city. So his formative years were spent in Nebraska, which is on the high plains, arid, single crop, mostly corn. And from the teen years onwards was beginning to suffer from a long agricultural depression, which became really severe during the 1930s, so that Nebraska was part of the Dust Bowl. He used a relative's home as the basis for most of the pictures in The Home Place, and used Lone Tree and other small towns round about as the location for the photographs of small town life. The novel has very little description. It concentrates on what Clyde is thinking and what he's seeing, but very rarely does it describe anything. He'll simply say that his daughter appeared with an egg she'd found laid in the yard. But then we get a photograph of the egg, which in a sense stands for the description he hasn't supplied in words. They move along together. They interact in the reader or the viewer's mind. They're not usually made to interact in the text itself, except by their placing, but there are no captions. Only one photograph is explicitly referred to in the text, and that is a photograph of a photograph. These boots are, I think, particularly interesting. They go back partly to boots depicted by Walker Evans in Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, and that picture in turn is indebted to Van Gogh's depiction of boots. And he does actually have a description just after you get this picture of the boots in words of what he calls the holiness of things. And this in American culture is very much indebted to Walt Whitman, the great poet, who talked about the eternal in the ordinary, that nothing in the end is just ordinary. Wright Morris was particularly interested in Edward Weston as a photographer. he admired Weston's modernism, the clarity of his pictures, and tried to get a similar clarity in his own photographs. Weston's illustrations to Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass was of particular interest because when Weston came to photograph the United States as a whole, his vision was inflected, so to speak, by Whitman, by the way Whitman saw the United States. So there's a much greater emphasis in Weston's work on folk art, folk singers, ordinary handmade gravestones, vernacular architecture, and so on. In fact, rather like the Farm Security Administration photographers. And Whitman, the great democratic poet, writing about wanting always to venerate ordinary people and ordinary life, is a primary impetus behind the home place as well. It's very interesting that both their hosts and the visiting family all seem to have problems with their eyes. The host the old man is very short-sighted. His sister has only one eye. The narrator is constantly saying, "I don't see too well." His son keeps saying, "What's that? What's that?" As if he too is not seeing things clearly. So the book, in a sense, is about seeing. And the reader gradually realizes that he or she is the only person who is seeing clearly. When they look at the family photograph, the old man knows what's in it but can't see it very clearly. Clyde, the narrator, doesn't know what's in it but can see it and is trying to identify it, so that together the words and the pictures produce a fully realized story and family life. This is Let Us Now Praise Famous Men by Walker Evans, who took the photographs, and James Agee, who wrote the extraordinary text, published in 1941, but based on work, both writing and photographs made in the 1930s, is probably the major text of words and pictures preceding the home place. And Morris certainly knew it and was indebted to it. In that text, Agee goes out of his way not just to describe the activities of the farm families they're writing about, but he even imagines their dreams, he imagines their sexual feelings, as if he is creating fictional characters. So Wright Morris goes a stage further and does make his people fully fictional. But of course, because the photographs also exist, we tend to see them as more than just fictional. We tend to think of them as having a bodily reality. Evans photographs his boots just on the bare earth, the earth that the tenant farmer ploughs and tends. And the Wright Morris looks down on the abandoned boots of the farmer who in his story is now unable to farm and in hospital and dying. They're ready for him when he comes home, but they're not, well, they won't ever be used again. what's happening in these texts is that documentary in Evans and A.G. is moving towards fiction, and in Wright Morris, fiction is moving towards documentary. I think it's ultimately about values. It's both an assessment of what is the right way to live, and but it doesn't come to any easy answers. The book ends ambiguously. You don't know whether Clyde and his family will move back to Nebraska. You're not sure whether a rural way of living is viable for modern people. It's still questioning when the book ends.